At the risk of sounding repetitive, I want to talk about media behaviour during the whole Dominic Cummings fiasco. Um, I watched a bit of the press conference. Actually, the start of that press conference, the one where he spoke from the Downing Street Garden, was a bit distracting because there was, I don't know if anyone else noticed, but there was some sort of background noise going on. It sounded like some sort of construction equipment or something in the background. First 5 minutes, it was very distracting. I haven't really changed my mind on Dominic Cummings from the press conference. I think it came across as interpreting the regulations to suit himself. I think it was a bad PR judgment to not show any semblance of contrition. The closest he came was to sort of say, I regret that, well, basically blamed the media. Essentially, he said that anyone looking at the media over the past few days will have been very angry with what I've done. I hope I can clarify this. He basically made excuses, right? He didn't say, I understand a lot of people have made sacrifices. Well, he technically did at the start, but he didn't say it in the context of what he'd done. Um, so I think he failed to sort of show any sense that he has any humility because I'm not sure that he does. I think he's a pretty arrogant individual. I mean, he just didn't sort of give any sense of, well, look, I understand why people would be angry because the impression that the government of which I am part of has given is that people need to, stay at home, stay at home, stay at home was the mantra. And I've done this. And whilst I believe I was right in doing this, I can understand how it looks like double standards, and I'm sorry for that. Even if he doesn't apologise for making the trip, he could at least show a bit of humility and say something in terms of regret for that. And I didn't really do that. It was very polished. It was very, I think Cummings is a very manipulative character. And clearly that was a very, very polished statement he made. I'm not suggesting he was lying exactly, but I do think it was very sanitized and polished and designed to vindicate him rather than to sort of show any humility. That having been said, I'm increasingly getting angry with the arrogance of the press. You know, um, this has been debated in many areas across the board, left and right, left and right, by the way, for the past 3 days. It's been the biggest story in the country. LBC tonight, I notice, are more moving on to other things like the issue for businesses during the lockdown, but like whether or not they reopen. But um, this is a reminder of how the press operate. So, in a democracy, in a liberal democracy, the role of the press, as I see it, is not just to report the news, it's to hold the powerful to account. That's an extremely important role, and it's something that is non existent in a totalitarian state like China under the Communist Party. And definitely that's an extremely, extremely important thing. I will always defend freedom of the press because I think without it, there is so many things that will not be reported. There are so many things that you'll still have scandals, you'll still have corruption, you'll still have sleaze, but at least it can be reported and it can be scrutinized. That's why it's so important. But I also am somewhat sympathetic to the concept of tyranny of media. Now, let me explain this. In Western countries, and particularly the UK, the power that the print press has historically been very significant. I mean, the Sun has traditionally had the power to make and break political parties in election time. They did that with Neil Kinnock in 1992. Corbyn supporters would argue they'd done it with him, although I think in the case of Corbyn, he sealed a lot of his own nails in the coffin in terms of his far left politics. So I'm also reluctant to just blame everything on the media. I think that's a bit of a cop out from criticism. Nevertheless, it would be short sighted not to consider that the media does have immense power, whether that be the print press, whether it be televised media, they are extremely powerful. And they will retort, oh, but we have to work within the boundaries of laws. We have to be careful about libel. We have to be careful about X, Y, and Z. And it is true that there is an official code of conduct that British journalists have to sign up to. And you'll notice every paper, even the tabloids, will have to abide by, I believe it's called the editor's standard code of standard, something like that. I forget. I'll just look. Actually, I've got a paper right in front of me. See if I can find the. I really need to know this stuff because I'm doing a course on it. I believe it's called the Editor's Code of Conduct, something like that. So even the tabloids have to abide by that, but very, very frequently they come pretty close to the edge, you know. Now, I could talk extensively about why I dislike particularly the tabloids, but I've done that before. So really, I think that the phone hacking scandal should have been a wake-up call. At that time, the news of the world and the papers under that umbrella did get a lot of heat, but in my opinion, not enough heat because these people make their entire pitch on hammering public figures, whether it be celebrities or politicians. You know, they relish negativity. So this Cummings story is wonderful for the press because it's a big story. And just to be clear, I do think it's legitimate to report it. I don't criticize the media for reporting it. I think it's a legitimate story. In fact, if they didn't report it, I think that would be a failure of journalism because it's a public interest story about the Prime Minister's very powerful advisor ostensibly ignoring his own or regulations that he helped to craft. So, as a story, I think it's totally legitimate. I don't think it's sensationalistic. I think it's a legitimate story because many people are making sacrifices. Many people. There was the case of the teenager in London who died, and his family couldn't even go to his funeral. And there'll be cases like that replicated across the country. 37,000 plus deaths. So there'll be many cases like that. Many people have really, really suffered in this, not just from losing loved ones, but from the pain of being away from families. Now, Dominic Cummings knows this. He acknowledged it in his statement. Um, so that's why it's a legitimate story. But because the press is carrying the story and because they're fueling the debate, you know, with call in from LBC and so on, and it's not that we, the public, cannot have our say. You know, I'm okay. I know I didn't get my slot in LBC, but other people did. They could have brought up the thing that I've brought up about the doorstepping. Um, Ian Dale, to be fair, said that he didn't approve of the mobbing, like mobbing by journalists outside Cummings House. So I don't think that every single person involved in the media approves of Lee's tactics. But here's the thing: when we talk about doorstepping, this isn't just paparazzi, which you'd expect, right? It's not just these sleazy journalists working for paparazzi agencies that really have no integrity whatsoever. I mean, the paparazzi are universally despised and with good reason because they are basically stalkers. But what troubles me is that we are seeing supposedly mainstream journalists doing this from the Times newspaper, from the Daily Telegraph, from the BBC, left and right. Even the Guardian's done it. So this can't just be dismissed as, oh, well, they're paparazzi. In my opinion, the behavior is no better than paparazzi. But they're not actually paparazzi. They will be people working for not paparazzi agencies, but for so-called mainstream newspapers. And I find that very troubling because it's normalizing it as a code of conduct. Now, they will retort, but Cummings is the center of this story, so why can't we ask him questions? I would say, yeah, ask him the questions, but not outside his own house. That's what I find so vile. Why does it have to be at his house? How, and that's another point. How do they find out where his house is? That's what I'd like to know. He actually said in the statement, and this is a point that maybe needs more attention, that he'd received harassment in London. He apparently had threats outside his own house. Now, he didn't actually name the media himself, but I wonder is that what he's referring to? He didn't specify who's making the threats. But here's the thing, whatever you think of Dominic Cummings, his family are not public figures. You know, they don't deserve to face that sort of harassment. It's a pretty intimidating thing if you come out of your house and there's a bunch of strangers and they can say, oh, we're just journalists doing our jobs, but it's, throwing questions in someone's face, ramming your cameras in someone's face. Don't get me wrong, Cummings absolutely deserves scrutiny and tough questions. But look at what happened. He made that press conference, and then the journalists could freely ask questions. We don't live in a communist state. He's a powerful figure, and he got scrutinized. That's the way it should be. But this vile practice of doorstepping, I would like to see an end to it. I don't think it's legitimate. Nick Ferrari told me, "Oh well, what other way is there to get to get the story? If someone, for example, is refusing phone calls, well, if a public figure is the center of a story and they're refusing to take interviews, whatever, just report that. Say we have tried to get them to do an interview and they haven't, they've refused our phone calls, and then the public can judge that. They'll say, okay, well that person's a card. For example, Jeremy Kyle ran away from the Commons committee to scrutinise the impact of reality TV after his scandal. Now, that showed Jeremy Kyle to be a moral card, that he couldn't even defend his own show. Instead, it was left to ITV producers. So public figures will still get judged, they'll still get scrutinised. I'm not convinced that doorstepping is necessary, therefore, as a journalistic practice. And it's just so pathetic to look at. These journalists clambering over each other, yelling out questions. I mean, how do they really think that they're being professional journalists? Now, to be fair, they may only be following orders. So really, the real criticism lies in the editors who have sent them. Because I suppose if you're working for a newspaper and you refuse to doorstep and you're a staff journalist working for a newspaper, you maybe lose your job. So I appreciate they're under pressure, but they need to be aware of how it comes across. And these senior editors who are are getting journalists to do this, you know, here's the thing that I find really, really galling, and not just me. I think this infuriates many people. The press carry the stories, but they never ever carry stories about the press. So they will report about the hypocrisy of Dominic Cummings, the hypocrisy of the government. They'll criticize politicians all the time. They'll criticize celebrities all the time. That's what they do. But when it comes to public anger at the way the press behave, they rarely, if ever, introspect. You will never get the BBC having an item on growing public anger against doorstepping. And I don't even know what sort of level that's at because we've no way to look at it because the press won't carry that story. I suspect I am not the only one that feels this way because I've just been looking at comments on the video. The Guardian actually showed this. And the way they put it was Dominic Cummings asked doorstep questions. Nice little way to gloss it over. But most of the comments were criticizing the journalists. So the media need to be aware that right now, okay, Dominic Cummings is the big villain. But if they are also coming across as villains in terms of the way they've handled it. I don't think those journalists are any better than Dominic Cummings by thrusting a camera in it. It's just a vile practice. If I was a public figure, I'd probably expect it. But if I had a family, I would be very protective of them. And I would be very angry if some hack came to my front door, rammed a camera in my face. I don't have children, but if I did, I'd be very, concerned about that. What I would actually do is I'd say to them to their face, I would say, do you think this doorstepping is a good practice? I would tell them, look, I'm happy to do interviews at my office if I was an MP, a constituency office, but don't come to my house. I'm asking you now, do not come to my house. I would even be tempted to phone the police and say there's strangers outside my house harassing me. Is that really untrue? Is that really far from the truth? I don't see why they get to behave in an obnoxious way just because they're journalists. If you've got a group of strangers outside your house playing a radio or something, it would be a public nuisance. It would be harassment. So I just think that our media, and I'm saying this in a generalized way because this is true across the board, whether it be a tabloid, red top newspaper, whether it be a so-called quality newspaper, whether it be the BBC, whether it be Sky News, they are all on some level culpable for this. Ian Burrell of the Eye was actually justifying this. He said that Cummings had the audacity to tell off the reporters who were doorstepping him. That's from the eye. Now, I'm aware that making this video, I could be burning bridges because I want to be pitching my articles probably to newspapers. But there has to be some honesty here. There has to be, I'd be working as a freelancer, so I wouldn't necessarily be bound to codes of conduct within the newspaper. I have to respect the editorial line on some level. But if I was asked to doorstep, honestly, I think I'd want to find another assignment. And it might sound like I'm trying to be holier than thou. I'm not. That's not the case. It's just I genuinely hate it as a practice. Let me know your thoughts.